How's it going, guys? Thank you so much for coming back. It really means a lot to me. Hopefully you've gone through the introductory episode and you have gotten a pretty good idea and a good sense as to where I want to take this company. I have my own opinions about ebooks, and this is one thing that may not have come through too clearly on the previous episode. As far as I can, I am going to not have any Kindle versions of any of our books, at least for the children's side of things. I am so against little kids, even like preteens being on tablets too much. It just disturbs me, so I do not want to contribute to that. I'll be having all of my books as tangible books, and since this is my company, we're not going to be doing PDFs. We're not going to be having Kindle versions of our books because I don't want them on digital formats. And that's that. Is that too mean? I don't think it's too mean. It's exactly what I want it to be. Now, for something down the road, I do plan on doing other genres, maybe not under the Pisces Rising Press moniker, but maybe down the road I'll have that as Kindle versions, but those are not intended for kids. Not at all. Some really crazy stuff I have planned. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and let's get into the most important part of this whole thing by far. More than do you know how to draw? More than do I have an editor? More than how many pages is this book going to be? Is story. Story is one thing that tends not to get as much attention as it should. It needs to be all of your effort. It has to go into the story. From how it's edited, does it serve the story? How it's illustrated, does it serve the story? Yes, it should. So let's just jump right into it. I have a lot of opinions. I have a lot of opinions. One of the things that a lot of people tend to ask me about is, where do you get your ideas from? Yeah, sometimes I do have snarky answers. Like Stephen King was famous for saying that he belongs to a service where every week this idea service sends him ideas in the mail. And people will actually believe that. It's not true, guys. It's not true. Ideas for stories are all around you at all times. This is something that I think you need to train yourself if you want to be a writer or an artist of any kind, a musician even. Look for the most minute things in everyday life. I mean, they can trigger huge things in your imagination. If you don't have kids, I get it. But kids will give you ideas like you can possibly imagine just by listening to them. Hearing them talk about their day, how their imagination sort of goes wild, is fantastic. Obviously, the younger they are, the better it kind of is, because you can get some really wild opinions on things or sort of misunderstandings of how things operate. And that is certainly one thing that I do want to talk about. Misunderstanding things, but intentionally misunderstanding things. This is a thing, yeah, it's sort of a little technique that I did when I was in my script writing class in college. It was eavesdropping. Now, that can get kind of strange and a little bit odd, but look, we live in a day and age of social media where everybody is telling you everything anyway. So maybe if you just crick your head out a little and you hear a little bit something going on at a coffee shop, is it really that big of a deal? Point being, if you go to any public place, coffee shops are great, I love coffee, and you just start hanging out and listening to what people are talking about, and you do not have a context as to what the conversation is, and then start jotting down notes. You then can listen to other people's conversations going on, jot down notes there. If you mix and match them, you can come up with some bizarre stories and bizarre bits of dialogue. That's a great technique. It really frees you up. Even if it's complete gibberish and doesn't make any sense, and it's something that like Lewis Carroll would have in The Rabbit Hole, it will still trigger something to you. You'll be like, well, it's just so far-fetched, I can't possibly do that. Doesn't make any sense. But you know what? if I did have these characters as two well diggers or chimney sweeps or whatever, it would then sort of make a little bit more sense, and then you steer that conversation onto a different platform. I'm a big fan of eavesdropping people watching. People watching is phenomenal. Do that as much as you possibly can. It inspires everything from character design to how people talk. Watching somebody walk down the street can actually trigger off a lot of ideas as to where that person comes from. You know, that's a really interesting way of walking. It kind of reminds me of like a cowboy. What's a cowboy doing in a hard hat? I don't know. Maybe he's a cowboy construction worker. Things like that can come to you organically. And the number one thing I always tell people, no matter what the discipline is that they want to get into, you need to get out more. We are coming out of a horrible period in which everybody was locked inside, everybody was glued to Netflix or their tablet or whatever, Zoom. God bless them, but you know what? Like, I just can't. I just can't. Number one thing is just get out, experience things, see things for yourself, and just go in with an open mind. So much of writing in any discipline is the creative mindset. At this very beginning, the inception stage, you need to just start throwing things out like left and right. I mean, pick things up, mish this with that, mix and match, have a nice little fruit salad. And do not forget some kind of writing pad. You can use a phone if you want. Notes, whatever. I'm a big fan of note cards. I buy 500 note cards at a time, and I tear through them like crazy. And you'll see that most likely in the next episode when we start to get into the note card aspect of things. So the number one thing is you need to come up with these ideas organically and on your own to some extent. What you do not want to do, and I have seen this time and time again, especially in film, is that people chase trends. This is a horrific idea. Do not do this. I know what's out there, and it's like this person is just crushing it with this character. These books are doing really well. Maybe I could write something just like that. Don't. Okay? The reason those stories are successful, those characters are successful, is because that creator lived and breathed them. It's part of them. It is not part of you. You as an audience member may enjoy it, may love it, but it is not you. It's the creator. It's a part of the creator. What is part of you? And that is something you need to find out for yourself. What characters inspire you to want to write? Because I can tell you one thing right now, and I've seen it time and time again, people will jump onto these bandwagons and start trying to mimic everybody else, and they run out of steam. And why do they run out of steam? Because it's not their own. It's not their thing. It just isn't. They're chasing a trend, they're trying to get the money, and it is not going to work out. Even if you freight train that idea and it's not your own and you manage to get the book done and you get it out, you are not going to stick with it at all. You're not going to have the long haul discipline to go for 20 plus years with the same characters because they are just not really you. Focus on what is you. Create those characters that make you actually smile. Trend chasing and money grabs will be sniffed out like you wouldn't believe, especially by kids. Kids can tell authenticity from the bogus replicas from 10 miles out. Take my word for it. When you and I were kids, we could. And the kids today can still do the same thing. Do not fall into that trap. You will waste your time. You are sometimes looking at potential lawsuits if you are copying certain people's characters a little too closely. Don't want to mention names, but there are a handful of characters out there that are just begging for lawsuits from major companies, okay? Like they just are stone's throw away from being sued for copyright infringement. Don't do that. Come up with your own ideas. Come up with your own characters. Live and love them. One thing that I did want to mention is that you do not have to be, by any stretch of the imagination, an expert on any sort of subject matter that you're writing about, unless it comes down to nonfiction, and it's very specific. You kind of do at that point. As long as you're interested enough to do the research in order to become knowledgeable enough to write a story about it, that's all that really kind of matters at this point, especially if you're dealing with a narrative. Fiction, you can get away with a lot. There's a lot of embellishment that you can do. However, if you are writing nonfiction and this is sort of like a textbook idea, yeah, I kind of do need to have experts in with you at least. At the very least, you need to be able to send your manuscript to those brainiacs out there that are phenomenal at that field. They will then look over it, and that's great. That's fine. You don't have to get a PhD in rocket science to write stories about space travel. You can find somebody at NASA who will look it over and give them a little bit of cash here and there, and then you have them as a technical advisor. The one thing you have to understand is that writing a story, writing a book, coming up with these characters, this is a long haul, okay? This is not a sprint, this is a marathon, and it is much longer than you think it will be. It just is. There's no way around it. There's a lot of people out there that'll tell you, oh, you can do this in 20 days, you can do this in 15 days. You really can't. You could, but guess what? It wouldn't be that great, okay? Like, there's a reason certain books take years to write, certain films take years to produce, certain concertos took lifetimes to put together. You can tell, okay? Like, you just can't. So think about the long haul, not a sprint. Just go at a nice leisurely pace. You will not burn out. Avoid burnout at all costs, okay? This will save you infinite amounts of heartache. Chipping away at your story in your book is the number one thing. Do not think of this as some kind of mad dash in which you just have to bludgeon through it, go through those brick walls, smash through all that stuff, and then you'll be at some kind of finish line. This is a small chipping away, and that's what you need to look at it as. Now, this may be discouraging to some of you, but some people chip faster than others, okay? And some chips are bigger than your chips. It's okay. We all end up with a book at the end of the day. We all end up as writers. Go at your pace. No, it's not a race. It just isn't, okay? One thing that I also want to talk about is that your idea is an idea. It's an idea. It's not a story yet, okay? Very different things. And a lot of people do get confused with it. I have lots of people that come up to me and they tell me about their great ideas for stories. And then when I'm like, well, what is the idea of the story? They'll say, fast cars. That's not a story, guys. It just isn't. Okay, that's an idea. That's something to start with. That's a concept, maybe. But stories, and it needs to be reiterated time and time again, is that it is a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay? That's what stories are. You have a character who starts at point A and goes all the way to point Z. And in that time, he or she becomes a much better character. They learn things. Not necessarily skills, but they just learn how to be better people. That's the story. One transitions to another. So, beginning, middle, end. Within the beginning, middle, and end, there are different things. There's certain, like, breaks. You could call them acts. It works for plays. It works for films. It'll work for you. So if you think about that, and we definitely will get into the whole idea of acts as I get into the next episode with note cards and story structure. More on that later. So once you have your idea, keep going. Flesh it out. That's awesome. Like if it's space travel, fast cars, toxic waste, the internet, creating some kind of digital animal, whatever. Does that make sense? Maybe it does. I think it does. If that does make sense, I'm copywriting it. But the one thing that I think everybody needs to really take away from is that your idea, if it gets you really excited, that is awesome and that is where you need to be. Okay? That is part of this whole thing, is that we need to do things that excite us as writers. Again, It's a long haul. It's not a sprint. You need to be excited because there are going to be days as you are sitting there in front of either your yellow legal pad as you write it out by hand, your word processor, or whatever it is that you're working on, whatever format you like to write in. And you're just going to be staring at that and realizing I have got so much more work ahead of me, okay? It's a long haul. It's a nice little jog, and just go with it. When you have your idea, start to think about the beginning, the middle, and an end that fits within that idea. If it's something like I had mentioned, fast cars, well, what is it? Maybe the characters are cars. Maybe it's a mechanic. Maybe it's a kid building a go-kart. And then you say, well, maybe the kid doesn't have a go-kart, but he needs to get one because he wants to be a go-kart racer. So, okay, well, that's a problem, and that's great. You have somebody who has a desire, but no means. That is maybe story 101 right there. How's he going to get the go-kart? Maybe he's really good with his hands. Maybe he can actually build it out of a lawnmower. And so then there you go. You have that whole setup. You need more conflicts. Maybe he doesn't have the money to buy the gas for the go-kart. Maybe he can't afford the entry fee. So then that becomes another problem that needs to be solved. So start coming up with ideas like that. Right at this point, you don't necessarily need to have anything 100% locked in. Keep it very fluid. Keep it very easy going. The fact is, up until the moment you are actually committing those words to paper, you can play around quite a bit. It doesn't have to be so serious. It doesn't have to be so locked down. Even when you're writing it, you can keep a little bit of fluidity to things, but more on that later. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you being here. And like I said, comments, questions, put it all below. Do the thing, hit the bells, subscribe and like if you want. No pressure. I'll see you next time. And as always, be like water, my friends.